Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast wherever you are in the world. I have a fantastic guest for the audience, listeners, and viewers today, Steve Sopko from Florida. And he is a versatile expert on global leadership, career narratives, and accelerating sales. And what's interesting is he uses his expertise around negotiation to help not only accelerate sales, but also to redefine career narratives. So today's talk is all going to be about leadership and entrepreneurship, sales, coaching, and the whole gamut. So I'm really happy to have him on. Steve, welcome.
Chris, it's terrific to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, chronicle your journey to what you're doing now.
Sure. So I'm an entrepreneur who has a background across government, Fortune 100, and startups. So government, I was the negotiator who opened the former Soviet Union to doing research contracts with the West. That was at the start of my career. I then moved into tech and was really a part of the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. Ended up at Dell, where I had a similar responsibility, negotiating for Dell. And I became an expert at moving work around the world and automating it. So that was the thing I left Dell with. And what I've always done in my career is I go from Fortune 100 to startup to Fortune 100 to startup. So I moved into Oracle, where I was the VP responsible for business practices and negotiations across 60 countries, Europe, Middle East, Africa. And after leaving Oracle, I started a company with a good friend of mine called Palisade Compliance. Palisade negotiates for companies who are being audited by Oracle. Exited that about a year ago because I wanted to take a shot at commercial space, really jump in with both feet. I live right near the launch pads. And I've spent the last year expanding beyond tech into the space industry. So now I'm a analyst for hyperframe research, and I focus on the semiconductor market and deep tech. But I also do this career narrative class and coaching where I'm helping people not only tell better stories, but tell the right stories in an arc that gets them where they want to go.
Yeah, really fascinating. And it's really opened up a whole can of worms around discussion. We'll talk about, first thing is just talking about this whole leadership. And I just had a conversation with another guest, and one of the problems with leadership is that there's no accountability, these colossal failures, and the leaders playing golf or eating steak dinners or giving themselves bonuses and then like laying off employees and healthcare, etc. How do you shift from fear-based to opportunity-driven, and how do you instill trust in leadership?
I didn't do that willingly. When I started Palisade, I was coming out of military and Fortune 100 thinking, which if you opened up my leadership toolbox, I had one tool, and it was fear. And the fear was, you're lucky to be here, you're lucky to have a job, all those things that we tell people who work for us in those big organizations. Then when I started Palisade, I hired a few people that had worked with us at Oracle who were the only people on the planet who knew certain things. One of the people we hired was the only person on the planet who could go inside a Siebel deployment and look at how the licensing all interacted. It's mind-bendingly complex. And fear didn't work on those people because what was I going to do? The company would be ruined if I fired them. And so I had to come up with a different approach that was not fear-based. And it's one of the reasons why I went into coaching classes and I really focused on it. I think one of the challenges is I had burned up a lot of credibility with those people with the old fear-based approach. So I think when we're looking at leaders and accountability, it has to start with us holding ourselves accountable and realizing where we have gaps in our own approach. And it is so easy to see the leaders in these big organizations just be completely insulated from the consequences of their actions. But I think it all starts 20, 30 years ago. They probably weren't the jerk who plays golf when the world is burning down around their ears. At some point, we make a decision as leaders to pull back and separate ourselves from reality. And I think that's an individual choice that each of us gets to make. But as I did, we also get to make a different choice. It's not all or nothing.
Yeah, really fascinating. And the kind of the storyline in the thread that I get from talking to you is you come across all these different industries. You got government, you got private, you got startups, and obviously culture, different experiences. but the underlying thing is like the skills, the skill sets. And one thing is talking about is how do you navigate obsolescence? Like, because resumes, I think college, expensive tuition, all these things are going to be by the wayside. So how do you navigate all of this?
The thing I talk a lot about with AI is nobody's sure who the buggy whip manufacturers are that are going to be put out of business by AI. When we were moving from carts and horses to cars, it was obvious who was going to go away. It was the buggy whip manufacturers. But none of us can really tell. And it really occurred to me when I was at Dell, I lost a third of my team in one of our reorganizations. And I was told I could backfill anybody I wanted as long as they weren't on this continent. And so I went from having been tinkering with the notion of going global with my workforce and that sort of thing. And then out of desperation, I had to. And it made me realize that the job I was in was going to go away. Just all these years later, 80% of people who were doing what I was doing at the time are gone. Those jobs just don't exist anymore. And I saw that coming and I thought to myself, I could be one of the people who hunkers down and hopes the wave misses me. But I decided to flip the model and go out and be one of the people making the change happen. And that, I think, has occurred over and over again in my life, where when we see that fear of obsolescence coming, it's like, okay, that fear is real. It's telling you something. But I think you have the choice to do something about it. And I fired a lot of people, and I would not recommend that as a career field. But I think that the alternative was things happened to me instead of me taking charge of my own life. And I think if more people did that, we would, as organizations, we would say, okay, we as an organization are about to become obsolete. What can we do with these people we have, with these assets we have, that'll create some value? And maybe it's a different direction, maybe it's a different career, but there's so many people in organizations who just want tomorrow to be like today. And it's difficult to work around that.
Yeah. The corollary, continuing the conversation, is some people say focusing on one niche is the only path to success. You can kind of have the government bureaucrat or just someone in government, or you have the startup founder, the VC, or you have just the corporate path. Yet you emphasize versatility. So how do you balance specialization with having a broad skill set?
It's difficult, honestly, because there's an old saying that specialization is for ants. The thing is, I wouldn't want to get on an airplane that was fixed by somebody who was dabbling in aircraft maintenance. There's a real place for expertise and specialization. And I think that one of the things I struggle with focus, because I am a huge victim of shiny object syndrome, and I will go and chase the next thing that interests me. What I've really had to do over the last few years is tell myself it's not that I'm never going to look at something else. It's just for this time window, I'm 100% focused on this thing until I achieve a short-term objective. Then I can shift to the next thing. So it's almost time slicing instead of trying to multitask. And whenever I try to multitask, I don't get anything done. Whenever I try to do space and semiconductors and narratives and juggle all that, it's a mess. And so I think the thing I've had to do is just say, okay, this afternoon, I'm focused on the career narrative workshop and my coaching. Tomorrow morning, I'm doing a paper on quantum computing with Amazon and looking at one of their new processors. And so I think that's the thing, whenever I'm talking to somebody who is very versatile and really treasures that about ourselves, it's very important that we segment it so that we get what we need, which is the variety, but we also get the productivity that the world really demands.
Yeah. And the person listening or viewing this, let's say they come to work with you, what's your client avatar, either their pain point, frustration, or their greatest aspiration or desire to come and work with you? Is it career transition? Is it accelerating sales? Talk about that.
Really, it's two, because of the versatility. I think the accelerating sales is, I like to talk about myself as being a plumber of the sales funnel. Because one of the things I find is when a company gets to about 300 to 600 staff, they've now added negotiators and finance and legal and risk managers. And what salespeople see is the funnel slow down to a crawl. And so That's one of the things that my co-founder at Palisade and I did at Oracle. We really accelerated those processes. And so when I'm working with a company, a lot of times I'm going through and remapping those processes. I'll even get into how are you going to recognize the revenue? How are you going to negotiate the terms? At Palisade, 25% of the Fortune 500 were our customers, which is unheard of for a small consulting firm. So we're really gifted at figuring out how those organizations need to work. So that's the sales optimization side. The career narrative side, what I find is it's mostly executives and mid-career professionals who realize that resumes stopped working about 10, 15 years ago for all of us. And the only way you get anywhere is by networking. And so there's just a tremendous group of people who are very frustrated with the way the job system, both in the US and Europe and India, is just broken for people in mid-career. And so we all go networking. And a lot of people are very fed up with networking because it's unstructured, it's random. And so trying to bring some structure to that, when a person's ready for, that's the perfect person for me to be talking to.
Yeah. What I really love is you've seen everything from the .com, you've seen the offshoring of jobs, you've seen government, now you've seen SpaceX and Blue Origin become leaders in space exploration when it was, in the past, it was NASA and the government. So what are your thoughts on AI in terms of just its pervasiveness, its impact, and how are you positioning your company to help clients with AI?
One of the things that I talk to a lot of my executive coaching clients about is diving into AI and making it a part of our day-to-day life. I use AI constantly. I started with ChatGPT when Grok rolled version 3 out just recently. I really started using that. Gemini 2.5 came out. So I'm looking at it as a series of tools. And one of the advantages I have is in my lifetime, we have gone from various technological solutions solving so many problems and creating so many more. So I think it's one of those things where AI is different because it's really beyond our control. You could choose whether or not you were going to use a fax machine or send an email or things like that. But I think one of the things I'm really excited about is when I was looking at processes, that there was one big tech company that I went through their entire organization and found people who had been doing the same mind-numbingly boring job for 30 years. They were just waiting for retirement. And they said that person didn't have 30 years of experience. They had 1 year of experience repeated 30 times. And that to me, just, I would not want to be in one of those jobs. And I think that if AI can take that away, that's going to be fantastic. The thing I'm really concerned about is these big organizations, we've all written very firm rules about the environment or about how we treat people or about our risk profiles. And those rules look set in stone. But when we're negotiating back and forth between companies as humans, we know which of those rules are important and which of those rules are aspirational. AI doesn't. AI can't figure that out. So I think what's going to happen very quickly is a lot of people are trying to deploy AI in between companies. They're going to very quickly realize that the AI gets confused when you've said this is your policy about carbon, but you're violating it all these places. And so it's what was it, HAL 9000 in 2001 went crazy because the humans were inconsistent. I think that's what I see as the key. I think there's a real opportunity for companies to say, okay, this is what's important, and we have to teach the machine what's important, and then we all have to live with it. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. And it's a cultural thing, not a technological thing.
When somebody listening to this, they're rethinking their career path, sometimes decades in the same role, what's the first step you suggest they take to create a compelling new narrative?
I think what you have to do is look backwards at what you've done as if you were looking at it as an outsider. One of the reasons that I really got into this was about a year and a half ago, I started getting very deep into the space industry. And I'm talking to people who are doing the most insanely cool stuff you can imagine. They're designing docking hatches for a lunar orbiting space station, all this sorts of stuff. But when they talk about it, they're talking the same way as a 30-year accountant sitting in the bowels of a big tech company talks about their job. We lose the excitement and the value of what we do. So I have never met somebody who we couldn't look back at the experiences they'd had and start to stitch together a narrative based on where they want to go. So I think that's the key. When I'm talking to a client, we do talk about where they've been, but I spend a lot more time talking about where they're trying to go. What are the traits they need to be able to show so people will help them get there? And then what if their experiences speak to those traits? So if you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, I'm at risk of obsolescence, or I'm afraid of AI, or the economy's about to go sideways, the thing I would really suggest is start thinking about what real value you create and how you can better articulate that.
Yeah. You mentioned both successful, unsuccessful ventures. What's one like tough lesson you've learned either in government or startups, or that ultimately shaped your approach to mentoring and mentoring founders?
It's interesting. I started volunteering as a founder mentor at the University of Central Florida's business incubator. And one of the things I promised myself is, and I almost had it tattooed on my arm, I will never get into a business for which I have to go and educate the marketplace about their pain and the problem they have. If people don't recognize they have a problem, it is so difficult to set up, okay, now I have to go convince you you have a pain point. Okay, maybe you don't. Then I have to convince you there's a solution for the thing you didn't know you had a minute ago. And then I have to convince you I'm the person to provide that solution. That's a huge hurdle for selling something. So the thing I learned from a couple of my failed ventures was anytime you're sitting there thinking people are silly, they don't understand the problem. It's you who has the problem. It's not the market.
Well,
That's a
yeah.
hard lesson.
Yeah. So we have a couple of around 5-6 minutes remaining, and a couple of the audience, they're wondering. So one thing is, because you mentioned Oracle, and again, you've been at the forefront of all these innovations. It's incredible. What are your thoughts on the electronic health record, in particular Cerner versus Epic?
It's interesting. The Cerner acquisition happened after I left Oracle.
Yeah.
But I think it really does fit with their long-term vision. The thing that always was really exciting to me about Oracle that a lot of people miss is that it's not so much the technology, it's what you're using the technology for. And you see it in their culture, the way their licenses work. Whereas many other licensing companies say you're using 3 seats of this or 5 seats of this, Oracle says you're using it to do this, and that's not in your license. And I think that's a very similar approach when they looked at the acquisition of Sun. They wanted to get into hardware. They look at the acquisition of Cerner, and that was because they wanted to be a part of the real value that's created around medical records. So I think that's the thing that I see. I don't really know a lot about the current Cerner and Epic situation, so I don't really think I'm probably the best person to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another follow-up question they have is, in terms of government, how do you see what are your thoughts on, because you're at SpaceX and Blue Origin, and how do you think you perceive the current administration? Is it going to help innovation? Is it going to be hinder innovation, or is it just going to be just basically the same? Talk about that.
You don't ask softball questions, do you? I think the thing I've always believed, and I'm not gonna really get into the political side of it, but I do believe anytime there's turmoil, what's the old expression that it's danger, but it's also opportunity. And so I think that so often, and it's interesting, the space industry, and I'm going to make some people angry by saying this, but the space industry is something that for 60 plus years has been really told what to do by the government. And it's something I've seen really since I've gotten into it. So much of the culture is to sit around and wait for the government to decide what it wants to do, pitch them on it, get a contract, cost plus, go do it. But then the government changes its mind about what it wanted, but that's okay because you weren't really able to do the thing you promised you were going to do to the government anyway. So you get another contract and you get another shot at it. Then SpaceX comes along and they won't do cost plus contracts because they won't hire all of the accountants needed to track the costs and comply with the government. So they only work on a fixed price basis. And that has turned the entire market upside down. It's crisis, but it's also opportunity. And so I think that whether it's the current geopolitical situation, tariffs, not knowing what the future holds, the thing I always tell myself is, okay, there's tremendous uncertainty, but there's always tremendous uncertainty. And I think that we have to decide, what can I do to see opportunities for not only me, but for the people I know? And that's one of the things that I really am a big fan of in the founder communities. I came up in the Austin founder community. And then when I transplanted back here, I moved back to Florida really to watch rocket launches in 2015. I wanted to find that community of people where you're not just looking out for yourself, you're looking out for other founders and seeing, hey, I don't see an opportunity here for me, but wow, there's an opportunity for this other person. And if you can be the person who connects people to opportunity, you can be the person who navigates through the turmoil that's created anytime we try to change stuff.
Yeah, Austin is a fantastic place and hub. I really enjoyed this conversation. And if people wanted to connect with you, learn from you, subscribe to your channels, how could they do that?
The best way is mystage2.com is the website that I'm doing a lot of my work through. But also, please don't hesitate to connect on LinkedIn as long as you're not trying to sell me something. I really enjoy connecting with people on LinkedIn and engaging there.
Yeah, excellent. I really enjoyed this well-informed talk, and keep up the great work.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's great talking to you.